All right, so we're diving back into the situation in Ukraine, and I'm sure you've seen these headlines too about a potential ceasefire.
Yeah, a 30-day ceasefire.
30 days, right? And it sounds hopeful, like a chance for things to de-escalate.
Mhm.
But the more I dig into it,
Yeah,
the more I see that it's not that simple.
definitely not.
There are a lot of conditions attached to this, a lot of moving parts, and a lot of that seems to be coming from the U.S. side.
Right. It's less of a straight up, let's stop fighting, and more like the opening move in a very complicated negotiation.
It feels that way. And with the situation changing so rapidly, almost by the hour, we wanted to take a deep dive into what's really behind this proposed ceasefire, what conditions are coming from the other side, from Russia, and, well, what it all might mean for the conflict as a whole without getting bogged down in all the little details that are constantly emerging.
Absolutely. I mean, the headlines can only tell us so much, right? What's really interesting is what's going on beneath the surface, what each side is really thinking and planning for, their motivations, and what this all means for the future.
Exactly. And I think a good place to start is Russia's reaction,
Hmm.
because it seems like that's going to make or break this whole thing. We're hearing that Putin is open to considering this 30-day ceasefire, which, on the surface sounds positive,
Right.
but then there's this immediate but, and that but is about the need to discuss terms first. And it's the specifics of those terms that are really interesting.
Yeah, what jumps out about these reported terms is that they're directly connected to what's happening on the ground right now, particularly in Russia's Kursk region. Putin is apparently demanding that Ukrainian troops, who are basically trapped in what's being called their last stronghold there, have to surrender. And that's before the ceasefire even starts.
It kind of reframes the whole thing, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's not so much both sides wanting to stop fighting, but more about Russia saying, we'll agree to a ceasefire, but only after we achieve this specific objective in this one particular area.
It definitely gives off that vibe, like they're trying to dictate terms from a position of strength, at least in that local fight.
And, it all ties into Putin's statements about how his troops are making rapid gains in Kursk. It makes it feel less like a genuine offer of peace and more like a power play.
Totally. And he's even said that Russia's next moves will be determined by how things develop on the battlefield. So it's not a solid commitment to stopping the fighting. It all depends on whether they keep winning.
And that brings us to another interesting aspect, the reasons Putin's giving for these conditions, and his skepticism in general. He's worried that Ukraine might just use these 30 days to get more weapons and reinforcements, which, if you're in his position, that's a valid concern, right?
Absolutely. I mean, think about it. If you're leading Ukraine and you're facing this invasion, any chance to rearm and reorganize is going to be crucial. So Putin wanting guarantees that Ukraine won't use this time to just train and get stronger, that makes sense in a kind of cynical way. It shows the mistrust and how both sides are always thinking several steps ahead.
It's like they're playing chess with the lives of their people.
Unfortunately, yeah.
So let's shift gears a bit and look at what the U.S. is doing. They're pushing hard for Moscow to agree to this pause. And Trump's statement, it's up to Russia now, that really puts the ball in their court.
It does. There's no mistaking that. And of course, there's the looming threat of more sanctions if Russia doesn't play ball, which has been a consistent tactic from the U.S. throughout this whole thing.
Right. Well, what caught my eye was Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent's comment about Trump being ready to apply maximum pressure on both sides.
Yeah, that phrase, both sides, is really important. It suggests that the U.S. isn't just leaning on Moscow, they're also probably putting pressure on Ukraine to maybe accept certain conditions or to not do anything that could derail the ceasefire, even if it's not the ideal outcome for them. It shows that there's a lot more diplomatic maneuvering happening behind the scenes than just trying to force Russia's hand.
Right. It's like they're trying to balance things out, manage expectations on both sides to actually make this pause happen. And the timing of all this is pretty significant, too, because it coincides with Russia claiming they've pushed Ukrainian forces out of Suza, which they're saying is a key town in that Kursk region. That can't be a coincidence, can it?
I doubt it. Putin's visit to his commanders in that area feels very deliberate, like he's trying to capitalize on this supposed victory to give himself more leverage in these discussions.
And then you've got the U.S. recently lifting that freeze on military aid to Ukraine. It's a sign that they're still committed to helping Ukraine defend itself, even while they're trying to work out this ceasefire. It's like they're hedging their bets, keeping both options open.
Exactly. It's like reassuring Ukraine that they haven't been abandoned while also trying to find a way to stop the fighting. And there are these reports of progress being made towards de-escalation during talks between the U.S. and Ukraine and Saudi Arabia. So it seems like Washington and Kiev are at least on the same page.
So, beyond Putin's statements, What's the official line coming out of the Kremlin?
Well, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov is being pretty cautious, saying things like, let's not talk about it before the talks actually start, which is kind of telling, don't you think?
It does make you wonder. It doesn't sound like a resounding yes, but they're not ruling it out either.
It's like they're playing their cards close to the vest, waiting to see what the U.S. is really offering and what they might have to give up before they commit to anything.
So taking all of this into account, where do you think things are headed? I mean, a lasting peace agreement still seems like a distant hope, but what about this 30-day ceasefire? Do you think it's actually going to happen?
I think a temporary stop to the fighting is definitely possible, especially if both sides see it as beneficial for their own goals, even if those goals are different. Russia might use it to secure the territory they've gained and maybe shift their forces elsewhere, while Ukraine could use the break to regroup and get more support.
Which leads to the somewhat cynical, but probably realistic view that even if we do get this ceasefire, both sides are just going to spend those 30 days preparing for the next round of fighting instead of actually trying to find a lasting solution.
I hate to say it, but that's a very real possibility. A 30-day pause without any real progress on the core issues that led to this conflict isn't likely to change the overall course of things. But, as you said, it does keep those diplomatic channels open, no matter how difficult those conversations might be. And that in itself has some value.
It's like they're trying to find a way to pause the game without actually ending it.
Yeah, a timeout.
So we keep coming back to this central issue, a ceasefire that hinges on Russia achieving its military objectives in a specific area of the conflict. It really shows how interconnected everything is, what's happening on the ground, the political maneuvering in Moscow and Washington, and the bigger strategic goals that each side is pursuing.
Absolutely, and it highlights the fact that even something seemingly straightforward, like a temporary ceasefire, is deeply entangled in the dynamics of this conflict and the broader global situation. There are no easy answers here.
It makes you think about what a pause really means in a conflict like this. On the one hand, it represents a chance to stop the violence and maybe de-escalate the situation, but it could also be a calculated move, a way to simply buy time and prepare for more fighting.
A chance to catch your breath before the next punch.
Exactly, and it raises a question that's worth thinking about. What does it really mean to pursue peace when both sides are still focused on winning the war? That's something that stays with you.
Definitely food for thought.
Absolutely. Well, unfortunately, we're out of time for this deep dive, but as always, this situation is constantly evolving. So we'll be keeping a close eye on developments and be back with more analysis as things unfold. Until then, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And to all of you listening out there, stay informed, stay engaged, and keep asking those tough questions.
And stay safe.
Absolutely.